welcome to another episode of Cemeteries Down Under. Today I want to tell you a story of two brothers, and this is a bit of a tragic tale. To me it is, I think it is, that became bushrangers, and you might have heard of one of them if you're my age or even older. And there was a book written called The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, and it was written in 1972 by an author, Thomas Keneally, and a movie was made of the same name in 1978. So Joe and Jimmy, they were part Aboriginal and also known as half-castes, and they were born to parents of an Aboriginal father and a white mother. Now, life wasn't easy for them, but they were well educated and they actually went to school. And Joe was the quieter one, more reserved, but Jimmy was known to have lots of personality and very outgoing and charming. Now, they both worked on a property owned by the Morbys in a country town not too far away. And Jimmy was married to a white woman, Ethel, and they had a child, and they lived on a house not far from the Morbys' property. And Ethel also worked as a housekeeper for the Morbys. Now, they weren't paid money and they did back-breaking work. Ethel was a housekeeper, and Joe and Jimmy worked as tree loppers and also horse breakers and cattle musterers on the property, on the farm. But they didn't get paid money for it. They were paid rations of food only, and sometimes that wasn't reliable. So Ethel worked as a housekeeper, and she was only paid food rations herself, but often had to put up with not being paid any food rations, and the jeers from the other women, the snide comments and the remarks of her being married to a black man and laughing at her black child. Even her Mrs. Morby's 16-year-old daughter Grace joined in, and she was pretty much outcast from the town. Her parents lived in a nearby town of Dubbo because they didn't want to live and be known as their only daughter being married to a black man. So things were really tough for Ethel and Jimmy. They just wanted to be like every other couple and every other family. But sadly, it was never to be. And Jimmy was getting sick of his wife being upset. And they were constantly starving because the rations wasn't getting paid often or properly. So they were often hungry and felt that they had to beg for food. Now, one night, Jimmy's brother Joe came to visit for a few days, and also their friend Jack Underwood, who was blind in one eye and walked with a limp. Now, together the four of them decided to pay the Morbys a visit. Now, Jack Underwood took a rifle with him and a tomahawk, but the rifle had no bullets, so it would have been for intimidation only, and to confront them about the behaviour and the lack of rations. I'll tell you what happened next. So the four rocked up to the Morbys' farm, and at first they spoke to Mr. Morby about the rations, and this was resolved pretty quickly. Then Jimmy decided to confront Mrs. Morby, who answered the door with the teacher Mrs. Kerrs about the things that she said about himself and his wife and his child. And according to him in court, he was laughed at and insulted. He said that they called him black rubbish and told him he should be shot for marrying a white woman. And that's when Jimmy, he said he blacked out and went into a rage. That night, he killed 3 of the Morby family, and the 4 of them escaped in the bush before anyone could come. So once in the bush, Jimmy knew Ethel and the baby weren't going to keep up with him. So he sent her back to Dubbo to be with her family. But on the way of walking there, she was ambushed by 3 men and locked up on the property, and then used as a witness later for the case when they were captured. Now Jack and Jimmy and Joe decided then that they would become bushrangers and go in revenge to anyone or any employer that had done them wrong in the past. And they set off in the bush, the 3 of them. Jack was caught not long after, a few days later, as he was too slow and couldn't keep up with the 2 brothers. And he was captured and eventually hung in Dubbo jail in 1901. Now Jimmy also worked as a tracker for the mounted police in New South Wales, so he knew what the police would be looking for while he was on the run. And he managed to elude their trail for over 3 months, which is quite a long time. By then, they were desperate. He'd gone on a killing spree and killed in total 9 people. They went to another farm owned by the Mackays from a previous grievance and killed 3 people there. So they were considered outlaws. And the police and the government was so desperate to capture them. It was marked that they wanted to be captured live or dead. And a group of 100 men, including police and about 30 Aboriginal trackers, went roaming around the bush to look for Jimmy and Joe. So the government proclaimed them outlaws, and they were the last people to be proclaimed outlaws in New South Wales. Now the 2 brothers were following up the Forbes River. So they were proclaimed outlaws by the government, and a reward for £1,000 was out for their capture, dead or alive, which was quite a great amount back then. That's how desperate they were, and they were the last men, or the last people, to be proclaimed outlaws in New South Wales. So they were also known as the last outlaws. The following day, the brothers were following the Forbes River, and 3 men were stationed at an area known as the Big Flat in the hope that they would see the outlaws. After noon, the 2 brothers were sighted and then all gave fire, hitting Jimmy, who fell as the bullet hit his mouth and through his cheek, knocking out teeth. With Jimmy wounded, the boys lay low in the bush for the next 3 days. The shooting left Jimmy weak, and on the 17th of October, the brothers were sighted again, and another shootout occurred, causing the brother to become separated. Jimmy was eventually shot again, and in the coming few days and captured. He was hung at Old Sydney Jail on the 18th of January 1901. Afterwards, Ethel was sent to a poorhouse in Sydney, and after the court case,
and after the hanging, she eventually married another half-caste man called Frank Brown. Together they had 11 children, and she died in 1945 and is buried in an unmarked grave in Rookwood Cemetery in Sydney.
So the last shootout caused Jimmy and Joe to separate. And Joe wandered on for a while, and then when it got dark set up camp for himself. Nearby farmers saw smoke and went to investigate and found Joe asleep. Joe quickly woke and tried to escape but was shot down dead. And the police laid him out and took him to a nearby pub in Singleton. And I'll take you to where his body is now. Okay, and this is where he's buried, just outside this cemetery here. And just a simple bush rock which was erected after, many years after. And it says Joe Govenor, bushranger, shot the 31st of October 1900. And it was erected by the Historical Society. May he rest in peace. And he was buried here because he wasn't allowed to be on consecrated ground with the others due to his crime and the fact that he was an outlaw, and probably the fact that he was half caste as well. Back then the society was very different. So I kind of feel sad for him that he's here all alone. May he rest in peace.
So when they shot down Joe Govenor, they brought his body back to a hotel called the Caledonian in Singleton, where the publican Tom Melody told a newspaper in 1949 that the dead bushranger was carried into what was then the dining room and laid out onto a table. Now what happens next is just awful. He described triumphant Singletonians, there was about 800 of them, struck matches on the soles of the dead man's body's feet to light their pipes, he told the journalist. The poor man had a hard enough life and was outcast. Yep, he snapped. But to be disrespected like that is just beyond belief. They, laughed and jeered at his body and then even struck matches on his feet to light pipes. It's just beyond words. That's the tragedy of it, that they couldn't even let him be respected in death. It was just awful. And that's what made me so sad about this story that I had to tell it. The Caledonian, the pub there, is the oldest hotel in the district, being first licensed in 1849. And just before I end this story today, I'll show you a clipping I found. Now, the Singleton Caledonian Hotel was very proud of their heritage, owning a photo of the deceased bushranger Joe Govenor, but a lot of people complained on social media that it was distasteful having a bushranger's picture on the wall, so they recently took it down. So, the poor man, he hasn't been allowed to rest in peace, I think. But I'm so glad that the Historical Society at least put a bush rock with a plaque on the area that he's buried. So what's your thoughts on the story of Joe Govenor? Was he a victim of the times? Should he have been gunned down and treated the way he was? even after death, or was he a cold-blooded murderer and deserved everything he got? I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts, so put them in the comments below. No judgment.
Thanks for watching another episode of Cemeteries Down Under. Hope you really enjoyed this story as much as I did when I read about Joe Govenor and his brother Jimmy. I needed to come out and pay my respects. I felt he had a bit of a tragic life as well as a tragic end. Okay, bye for now. See you on our next adventure.